Hey guys, welcome back to ChemistryBuddies.com. Today I have two special guests here to talk with me about moles. What is a mole?
A mole is the amount that contains the same number of units, and what I mean by units is like atoms, ions, or molecules.
How do you measure a mole?
To answer that question, Alvin, I'm gonna just think a little bit, right? We know what a mole is, right?
Yeah.
A mole of a substance is the amount that contains the same number of units, and what I mean by units is, what are the units we're talking about?
Moles per gram.
Wrong. Units are atoms, or molecules are ions. So the same number of units in the number of carbon atoms in 12 grams of carbon-12. Let's say I have 6.02 times 10 to the power 23 molecules right here. That's one mole.
I know.
How do you calculate the mass of a mole?
How do you calculate?
Use the formula. Mass of 1 mole equals mass over number of moles. You get the mass of 1 mole. Well, that's a good question.
You get a mass.
Yeah.
1 mole.
Okay.
I
Exactly.
have no idea.
That's it, guys.
You're gonna take the number of moles in a given mass, and you're gonna divide the mass with the mass of 1 mole.
What do you mean by the number of moles?
Number of moles. No, that's what we're trying to find out. Yeah.
So the number of moles is just the number of moles.
Exactly.
How do you find the mass? The mass is the AR or the MR. What is the AR or the MR? Atomic mass or molecular mass?
Yeah.
Once you just look at the periodic table and look at the numbers up there, you get those numbers, add it to whatever the molecule is or the element, and then that's the mass. Once you convert those numbers into grams. All you got to do to convert them to grams is put G on it.
How many atoms in a mole?
Mole of a substance is the amount that contains the same number of units as the number of carbon atoms in 12 grams of carbon-12. What I mean by units is the atoms or particles in 12 grams of carbon-12. So there's a certain amount of atoms in carbon-12, and that is 1 mole. How much atoms you say? Well, that's 6.02 times 10 to the power 23, which is how much atoms are in 1 mole, also known as Avogadro's constant.
Avocado.
Next question.
How do you find the mass of a mole?
How do you measure the mass of a mole? You get the mass of a given number of moles, and you find that by getting the AR and the MR. AR is atomic mass, MR is molecular mass. You get those numbers in the periodic table, you add them together, you get that.
What do you mean by the mass of mole?
That is a good question. So, let's say H2O, right guys? Okay, hydrogen's over here somewhere. 1. That's 1. So you do plus 1, and then you do, it's 2H. 1 plus
1 plus 16.
plus 16 plus 16. That's
No,
what
there's only 1 oxygen. There's 2 hydrogen.
H2O, there's 2 O's.
2 O.
Oh, how to find the MR of H2O? Get these two little numbers up here. 1 oxygen is 16, and you get 2 hydrogens, which is 1, 1. That's going to be 18 in total. That's the MR.
What is the empirical formula?
So what is the empirical formula? Well, the empirical formula. Empirical formula shows the simplest ratio in which atoms are combined. This is the formula. Find the masses that combine in grams by the experiment. Change the grams to moles of atoms. Then this tells you the ratio in which the atoms are combined. For example, 1 to the ratio of 2, 2 to the ratio of 3, whatever. So then you can write the formula. The empirical formula shows the simplest ratio in which the atoms have combined. So let's say you have 1 oxygen, 2 hydrogen. That would be 1, 2. Yeah? Then you would have 2 grams of hydrogen and 16 grams of oxygen. That would be 1, 2. There's 2 moles of hydrogen and there is 1 mole of oxygen. There you go, boom. Sulfur has 32 as its MR. Is it correct? MR? Yeah, molecular mass, yeah. And oxygen has 16 as its molecular mass. But we have 2 moles of oxygen because 16 plus 16, what is that? That's 32. Very good. So then we have a ratio or an empirical formula of 1 to 2 because we have 2 oxygen atoms and 1 sulfur. And then that would then be SO2. It's like the same thing. Empirical formula is the same thing as like also writing H2O and doing the ratio. Then that would be 2 to 1.
How much volume does 1 mole of gas have?
There is 24 dm cubed, 1 mole of gas.
Yes.
Yes.
What is the formula to find the number of moles in gas?
Well, that's quite easy. Remember, you guys should draw a triangle so it's easy on the test. It's number of moles over the volume at room temperature over 24 dm cubed, because that's always constant. It's always going to be 24 dm cubed. So all you got to know is number of moles equals volume at room temperature over 24 dm cubed. That's the gas formula.
What is molar volume?
Molar volume is just the gas volume.
Is it?
I think so.
Okay. Can't say I think in chemistry. It's not good.
Sorry, I know.
We're gonna
I
explode the
know it
classroom.
is.
Do the masses of substances that combine have the same ratio?
Important rule to remember, guys. What Alvin just asked us was that do the masses of substances that combine have the same ratio? To answer the question, it is yes, they do. And we can use that terminology to know masses are always the same on each side, right? When you have an equation and the mass is always the same on each side. You have 8 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. That's 18 on this side, and then when they combine, it's going to be 18 on that side.
What is the molecular formula?
How do you find the molecular formula? Well, to find the molecular formula, 2 easy steps. But we gotta go back to what we just said. What is the empirical formula? The empirical formula is the simplest ratio between an equation. And then we take that ratio and we say, you know, if it's 1 to 2, and that's gonna be To find the molecular formula, calculate MR over empirical mass for the compound. This gives a number n. Just remember, it gives a number n. Multiply the numbers in the empirical formula by n. Okay, so before we find out what the molecular formula is, we gotta know what the empirical mass is and what the molecular mass is. Molecular mass is just the mass of the molecules. What we need to know before finding the molecular formula is that we need to know the empirical formula, which is just the simplest ratio of the atoms, the empirical mass, which is the mass calculated using the empirical formula, and the AR values. So we just use the empirical formula, the simplest ratio of the elements. We just take the AR values of those elements and get that mass. That's the empirical mass. And the relative molecular mass is just the mass of the molecule. All we need to do is 2 steps, 2 simple steps. Calculate using the MR over the empirical mass. I just explained both of those. For the compound, this gives a number n. I'm going to calculate by using MR over empirical mass. I'm going to get n. Then I'm going to multiply n by the number in the empirical formula. I'm just going to say something right now. We need to know the relative molecular mass. What is relative molecular mass? It's the mass of a molecule. Empirical mass is the mass calculated using the empirical formula and the AR values. So you're just going to take your empirical formula, which is the smallest ratio of the atoms combining. You just take the grams of that. After all of that, we can find the molecular formula. Molecular relative mass on top over the empirical mass, which is the mass calculated using the empirical formula and the AR values. Then we get n. With this value, we multiply the numbers in the empirical formula by n. What do I mean by the numbers in the empirical formula? For example, we have C4H9, and I get n equals 2. Then I do 2 times C4H9 and get C8H18, and that's going to be the molecular formula. That's the real formula on how the molecules combine.
What is the concentration of solution?
The concentration of a solution is the amount of solute in grams or moles that is dissolved in 1 diameter cubed of solution. Let's say you have, I don't know, water. Yeah, there's some flour in there. You need to know how much of that flour you're pouring into the water to know the concentration of that now flour water. The way to figure out that now concentration of the flour water, dividing the amount of solute in moles, or just dividing the amount of solute with the volume of solution. You have the amount of flour that you used, and then you divide that by the amount of water you used. That easy.
What is the yield of purity and products?
What's the purity? Well, the purity is how pure the substance is. And we know that by knowing how much impurities are in it. If it's 100% pure, there is no impurities in it. But we need to know what the yield is. Well, the yield is just the amount of product that you obtain from a reaction. To find the yield, we gotta calculate the actual mass obtained at the end of the experiment. Then we gotta divide it by the calculated mass. And the calculated mass is just how much you would have made, and the actual mass is how much you did make. And times that by 100 to get the percentage.
How do you find the purity of products?
You find the mass of the pure product and divide that by the mass of the impure product obtained. Times by 100, you'll get a percentage, and you will get the answer. So we have a product in the beginning. We're going to explain how to find the purity of a product.
Is that, do you combine
we have a product in the beginning. We separate the product, the impurities, and the product. Then we measure how much mass is of the impurities and how much mass is of the real product. Then all you gotta do is divide the mass of the pure product by the mass of the impure product, times by 100, and get the percentage of how dirty it was.
Basically, in this example, we have 32.
What example?
This one. The empirical formula.
The pickle formula. Ah, that one. Yeah, of course. That's the answer?
Oh, nice. Okay.
We use Avogadro's constant. What is that lady just walking in place like this?
The second one.
I know, how do you calculate a mole? I know.
How do you measure more?
He wrote it wrong!